Well, several weeks ago, we met in Kyle Field. You were there. And we did it because there was a career fair in this building. And as I thought about that moment, if you just kind of pull the lens back and think about that night, it was interesting to think. In one arena, there was worship going on of the Lord as we drew near him and trusted him. And in another arena, there were people pursuing a career and trying to get a job. And as you think about that, and I thought about these two arenas and these two circles, I thought these are major pieces of the college life. The Christian college student particularly, these are two massive circles of your life. On one side, there's this, I want to know God, and I want to pursue God, and I want to please God. And then on the other side, there's, I got to get a job. Like I got to pick a major, and I got to get hired, and what am I going to do with my life? And those kind of questions. And I've noticed with these two circles, for many of us, when we talk about them and think about them, they overlap, but not a ton. When I talk to a lot of students, there is overlap, but it's sort of like, all right, I'm going to get a job and give money to Christian things. Or this circle will overlap, and they go, I'm praying and asking God to give me a job, and I'll be moral at that job. Like I'm not going to show up drunk. But beyond that, there's not much other overlap. And so the reality is when I talk to students, it's almost two completely different conversations of what's God doing in your life and what are you going to do as a career. There's not much overlap. But the reality is as we look at the Bible, and particularly our text tonight, you're going to see that Paul says not only do these touch, there's major overlap. And the reality is worship should drive our work. And I know for many of us to think that way, we're like, I don't even understand how that works. Because when I think of work and I think I got to get a job, when you just say to me, hey, you got to get a job, the first thing that rises in me is fear, not worship. So how does that work? And there's a lot to say about it we won't get to tonight. But I want to enter into this conversation with Paul because he's going to show us how does the Christian walk into and Christianly go to work. And the reality is, if you haven't been with us, we've been looking at the book of Thessalonians, and this is Paul writing to a group of people who are brand new Christians. They just became Christians, and it's like this total rebooting of their life. They're like, okay, I just radically realigned myself in the universe under the lordship of Jesus. This changes everything. And as Paul's writing this letter, he's telling them yes. And the section of the letter we're in is him talking about, when you align yourself with Christ, the Christian life radically reorients how you enter into the world. And really, in the section we're in, he's going to say it radically reorients three areas. One we looked at last week was sex. This week is work. And next week is the end times. So it's interesting, if you ever just read 1 Thessalonians in a cursory way, there's a big section on sex and a big section on the end of the world. And so you read it and you're like, was he talking to the Thessalonian youth group or what? It's like all about sex in the end times. And then there's this little work section crammed in the middle. But the reality is if you look at it and step back, you go, actually, these are three major themes in any human life. Like, what do people really care about? If you talk to people, they care a lot about sex, they care a lot about work, and they care a lot about death. These are things we think about a lot. I mean, go to the magazine rack at your grocery store. And what's the magazines about? It's about sex, it's about work, or it's about staying healthy so you don't die, right? That's what it's about. And what Paul's doing in this section, and really all he's doing, quite simply, is saying once you've become a Christian, once you've come to know that God came to rescue you in the person of Jesus, that he calls you into his family, when you enter into that family, there's a new Christian ethic. And all Paul is doing is applying Christianity to your life, into the areas of sex, to the area of work, and to how you perceive your death. And so last week, he said, here are the basic Christian ideas. Here's how it applies to the most intimate sphere in your life, the bedroom. Now this week he's saying, here's basic Christian principles, and here's how it applies to the most broad place, the boardroom. How you apply Christianity sexually and how you apply it in society when you step out into the world. That's what he's looking at. And basically in the text, what he's saying is this: when you become a Christian, there's two major driving forces that are deeply connected to the Christian. We live to love God and to love people. And so he started last week by saying, you live to please God, and so love God with how you use sex. Use it in a way that honors him. And then he said, and use it in a way that loves people. Use sexuality in a way that helps people and doesn't steal from people. And now this week he's going to move in and say, and when you get to work, it's that same thing. Love God, love people. Now let me just apply it to work. And how does love motivate work? That's where we are tonight. And I got to tell you something. As I thought about you and thought about this text, I thought about teaching this, and I realized this is not one of those sermons that's going to land like a bombshell. Like for many of you, you're probably not going to cry at the end, be like, he's right, I got it. Like it's not one of those kind of sermons. But Paul's going to tell you, for many of us, the way we pursue work is really driven by fear. And he's going to say, I want you to think about work as being driven by love. And you go, I don't even understand how that makes sense. So what I'm going to teach you about tonight is it's a major area of your life. If you think about a given week, you spend about a third of your week unconscious, all right? And then you spend another third when you graduate from college, you'll spend it at work. And so the majority of your awake time will be at work. The question is, what does the Bible say about how you do it? And I think if you apply what Paul's saying here tonight, it's going to change your life. It's going to change your life. And so he moves into this, and he's talking about loving God, loving people impacts your sexual life. And then when he moves in here, he says, now concerning brotherly love, in a general sense, in a broad category, brotherly love, we don't need to write to you. He says, you don't need someone to reteach you about this general concept because you got it. And I love he uses this term, brotherly love. It's the word Philadelphia, right? It's the actual word. So if you're reading through it in Greek, it just says, now concerning Philadelphia. And you're like, interesting. What's he going to say next? Like, they make great cream cheese. Film Brocky there. Remember that. But he's saying, no, now concerning brotherly love. And what's cool about that is in all Greek literature, that word is only used of nuclear family, your brother, sister, stuff like that. Paul takes it outside of just your biological family and says, hey, when you're a Christian, your brothers now, your sisters. Look to your left, look to your right. Behold your family. That's your brother, that's your sister. And so if they're in need, you take care of them. And we take care of each other, and we look out for each other. This was a radical concept. And he says, so this huge category of now we're a family, now we're supposed to love each other like you would your own brother or sister, this category of brotherly love, he said, I don't really need to tell you you should do that. And then he says two reasons why. Number one is because he says, because you've been taught by God. And I love it, he makes up a word there. Paul's the only one who ever uses it. He takes the word God and the word teaching and slams it together. Theodidactus. Anyway, forget it. He says, because you've been taught by God. And you go, what does that mean? Well, taught by God shows up in the Old Testament in Isaiah. Isaiah says there will come a day, God will usher in a new time in history where people will be taught by God in a specific and beautiful, different way. In John chapter 6, Jesus says that time is here. He said, as the gospel's preached about me, he said the Father, and then he quotes that text, will do what he promised through Isaiah. He will speak to your hearts and tell you to trust me. And he says, Isaiah is about me, that God will come, and as you hear the gospel preached, it'll begin to work on your heart and convince you that you need Jesus and need to be in a relationship with him. And so Paul's grabbing those concepts, and he says, you don't need me to tell you, hey, you're supposed to love people, because guess what? You know that. Because when I preached the gospel to you, he said in chapter 1, the Holy Spirit of God went to work on you. That's what Paul unpacks in another text, 1 Corinthians 9. He says the Spirit of God comes and begins to convince you the truth of Jesus. And when the Spirit does that, he says in Romans 5, that God sheds abroad his love in our heart through the Holy Spirit that he's given us. Or he says in Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit is love. So what he's saying here is, when the gospel came to you, God began to tell you this is true. And when you realized Jesus isn't just a moral example, he came to earth, he came and became a part of our lives, and he came to rescue me, he came to get me, that's what the universe is about, is relationship, and God has come to grab me. When you realize that, he says the Spirit of God lands in you and makes you love God, and you're like, yes, I love him. And then not just him, you go, he came to rescue me, he came to save me, he came to save us. Look at you, he came to save us, bro. And we get all excited. And he says, the Spirit in you is teaching you to love people. And he said, I didn't even have to tell you people. You just looked around and you're like, get over here, you. And suddenly y'all are becoming family. And then he says in the next reading, he says, you're doing this all throughout Macedonia. He says, all around you guys are realizing Jesus saved us. We're this little Jesus crew and we're family and we can hang out and we love each other. And he says, great, you got that concept. He said, I don't need to give you the big concept of you should love people. I don't have to say, hey guys, you really should stop hitting each other. All right, stop stealing. He's just saying, I don't even have to tell you. You already love each other. It's great. But then he moves on and says, but I urge you, brothers, to do this more and more. He says, you've got the concept, but I want to call you to more. I want you to take brotherly love and drive it in deeper. And so it's cool. He's saying, you got the concept, but I wanted you to send it in deep. And he's about to tell you, this is how to become a varsity lover of your brothers, all right? I mean, I'm just no more JV. I'm going to make you a serious lover of the brothers. And you think what he's going to say next is going to be huge and just kind of epic and life-changing, explosive. And he says, this is how you deeply love the brothers. Aspire to live quietly. Mind your own affairs. Work with your hands. Or to say this, and this is a faithful translation, he says, you want to love the brothers? He says, then make it your ambition to be quiet and mind your own business and get a job. That's what he says. And so it's not the most passionate text. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's not one where you're going to be like, oh my gosh. It's like, love the brothers, help, and shut up and quit bothering people and get a job. Okay, all right. Now, if you're following along and tracking with me, you read that and you go, I don't get it. What's he saying? What does that have to do with work? And what does that have to do with brotherly love? But the reality is, if you look at the text, this is all connected. They're not two different subjects. This is all connected. This is how you love people. So you go, what does this mean? Well, I'll give you the principle, and then we'll talk about practical steps. That's where we're going tonight. So the principle he's saying is this, in a real general way. The principle is, when you step out into society, you as a Christian, when you leave here and go out into the world, the principle is this: I want you to be a productive force, not a disruptive force. That's what he's saying. When you, Christian, walk out into the public square, I want you to look and say, I'm going to be a productive source, a source of life, not a disruptive source, a source of disruption in the community. That's who I'm going to be. I'm going to be a source of blessing, not drama. And as a Christian, if I do that out there, if that's the guiding paradigm, I'm going to help people. I'm going to help the family. And you go, how does that work out? Well, for them, quite honestly, there's two places you can go to figure out what was going on with them. Acts 17, you find out that when Paul preached the gospel, he was calling Jesus the Christ. That means the anointed one. And it started a riot in Thessalonica, and at the riot, they dragged out other Christians and said, they're proclaiming a king other than Caesar, Jesus. And they made it a political issue, and it almost killed people. It got real dangerous. And so in a political sphere, he's saying, hey, make it your ambition, and these are political words, to live a quiet life and to mind your own business. He's saying, Christian, don't take your Christianity and use it as a chance to start a fight in the government, dial up the drama, become a disruptive person in the community, hold riots, light stuff on fire. Don't do that kind of stuff. You chill out. Because if you become disruptive, you're going to make it dangerous for us. And so take it easy. And then on another side, in 2 Thessalonians, you see that one of the issues in the community was people said, oh, Jesus is coming back. The world's going to end. I don't need a job. I got Christian brothers. They'll take care of me. This brother's got cash. I don't have to work. Yeah, Christianity. All right. And they're excited about that. And they're bums. And he says in that text, he's like, hey, if you don't get a job, you don't eat. All right. Go get a job. And he says, you need to be a productive source. You don't need to just sit back and mooch off society. He says, because when the outside world sees a Christianity like that, it puts us in disrepute. It makes us look bad if you're doing that. So don't do that. And so you can apply it very generally. You can say politically, don't take Christianity and make it a source of argument and yelling at people and making everyone the enemy and just kind of dialing up drama. And then don't take Christianity and be one of those people who just kind of sits in the back row at the church and critiques everything and criticizes everyone, but never lifts a hand to help. And so he says, and I'll just apply this very broadly and then we'll move on. He says, when you walk into a sphere, think about yourself this way. Actually, we could say it this way. There was an article in the paper a couple weeks ago about Texas A&M. And it was about a paper that came out that was an internal paper at A&M, and that is they went to each employee at A&M and they used some formula, I don't know how, to determine if every employee at the university was a profit center or a cost center. So they looked at every employee and said, are you someone who brings money in or do you suck money out? Are you a profit center or a cost center? Which is a pretty stressful thing to look at you and go, you're a cost center. I don't know how that feels, and I don't know what that document's for, and I'm not really going to talk about it. I just bring that up to go, they were looking at people and saying, do you bring profit or do you bring cost? What Paul is saying here essentially is you need to look at yourself. When you walk into your public arena, when you walk into your classroom, when you walk into your church, when you walk into your job, are you a source of life? Do you bring blessing? Do you bring productivity and peace? Or are you a source of disruption? Do you bring discord and disharmony and hurt people and are obnoxious? What do you bring? Or are you a zero? Do you bring nothing and you're not really making any kind of difference? He says, I don't want you to be a disruptive source. I want you to be a productive one. And when the world looks at the Christian community, I want you to be someone who breathes life into this world. A great example of this would be Daniel. Personally, I think that's what he has in his mind. Daniel in the Old Testament, if you remember, he was a Jewish boy growing up in Jerusalem until they were taken over by pagan Babylon, right? And as they were being hauled away to go live in this pagan society, the prophet Jeremiah said, hey, when you show up in Babylon, seek the shalom of the city. He says, this is the way the believer should act in pagan Babylon. We don't start a coup. We don't start an anti-Babylonian king movement. We don't try to topple the government. We don't become subversive terrorists and blow up buildings. We don't go after people. That's not the Christian mode. He says, how does the Christian involve himself in a pagan and lost culture? You seek the shalom of the city. And so David and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember that? They showed up, and what'd they do? They went to college. They learned what they had to learn. They got good jobs that fit their gifts, and they did great work. And they became these amazing sources of productivity in that culture. And then whenever the culture went crossways against their allegiance to God, they were willing to die for God. So they would work hard in the culture. They'd do everything they would ask them to do. It says their work was 10 times better than everyone else around them. These guys were awesome. And then they said, you guys are great. Bow down to the statue. And they said, no, sorry. But even in that moment, when they said, bow down to this statue of me, the king said this to them, bow down to it or else I'll kill you. They didn't say, well, go ahead and try. I'll kill you first. All right, like they didn't suddenly become angry. They didn't even complain. They said, King, we don't have any excuses for you. We can't bow to your statue, so if you need to kill us, go for it. God will save us or not, but he's God either way, and we're not going to worry about it. And they landed in a fire, didn't burn up, got out, and everyone's like, your God's the best. And they're like, we know. And they went back to work. And I got to tell you something, Daniel and those guys, they changed the culture. And by the middle of the book, you see Nebuchadnezzar praising their God. And so you look and you go, these little Jewish boys were parachuted into a pagan culture. And what did they do? They were a source of productivity, not disruption. They flourished in the culture, and they changed the culture. And he says, that's what you're meant to be, little yeast. I go dropping you into a city, and a couple years later, we go back, and Dallas is very in love with the Lord, or wherever you end up, Snook, or whatever. And you drop in, and you become this source of productivity in the culture, and you change it. Now, the question is, and really what we need help with is, okay, Ben, I got that. Thank you. That's the general principle. How? How do I do that? How do I become this productive force in society? And how does that ultimately love the brothers? We need to answer that question. Well, this is what you do. Here's the practical. I'm going to tell you what to do, how to do it, and the results, and then we're done. What do we do? 3 things. Number 1, the what is you work with your hands. Work with your hands. How do you love the Christians as you enter into this community? You get a job. But look at how. Look at the motivation. It's not getting a job that's revolutionary that you're like, get a job. No way. Like, people are getting jobs all over the place. I want you to see the motivation for why you work with your hands. It's the motivation that's revolutionary. He says that it's brotherly love. That you know brotherly love, I tell you to do it more and more, work with your hands. And so work is an outpouring of love. That's revolutionary because when most of us think about work, what comes to mind? Like if I said to you, you need to get a job, what comes up in you? Fear and anxiety. You're like, I do, oh my God. Okay, don't panic, believe in yourself. All right, like you panic, right? And most people, when they pursue getting a job, what is putting the energy behind the pursuit? It's fear. Now think for a minute, what's driving the fear? If you're scared you're not gonna get a job or scared about getting a job, what's energizing the fear? Where does that fear coming from? Let me tell you what it's not. You're not afraid you're gonna starve to death. Nobody in here, when you think, oh, I'm nervous about a job, I'm nervous they like me, you're not nervous that you're gonna end up on the side of the road, about to waste away, and as you breathe your last, you go, I should have padded my resume. You're not afraid of dying of starvation. So what are you afraid of? What's energizing the fears? Think about this. What's energizing the fear? 2 things. Number 1 is financial security. You want enough money to do what you want. It's not that you're afraid you won't have enough money to survive. You want enough money to do what you want to do, right? I don't want all the money in the world. I just want enough money to do whatever I want, right? So financial security is part of it. And number 2 is esteem, approval. That I get a job that I can tell people I'm working here and they go, wow. Or I can show up there and I feel good about myself because I did it, wow. And so it's either about financial security or personal fulfillment. I can look and I go, I mean something, I got this job. I'm important, I work at this company. We even name drop what companies we interviewed with just to be like, bam, all right, just kind of to tell people, because why? It fulfills us. And so for most of us, the fear that drives us when we go searching for a job is financial security or personal fulfillment. What's crazy about that is that as you look around in our culture, we're very insecure and unfulfilled people. What's going on with that? I read an article the other day, and it says this: in the spring of 2009, Nathan Hatch, president of Wake Forest University, admitted what many educators have seen for years, that a disproportionate number of young adults have been trying to cram into the fields of finance, consulting, corporate law, and specialized medicine because of the high salaries and aura of success that these professions now bring. Students were doing so with little reference to the larger questions of meaning and purpose, says Hatch. That is, they chose professions not in answer to the question, what job helps people flourish, but what job helps me flourish? And as a result, there's a high degree of frustration expressed over unfulfilling work. Isn't that interesting? That when we go in saying, I gotta find financial security and personal fulfillment, and if that's what drives you to get a job, where you end up is picking a job where you're not secure financially, you're anxious all the time about money, and you're not fulfilled. And you go, so I'm pursuing fulfillment and finances, and I'm not getting either. What's happening? You're doing it wrong. So what's the answer? He says, I want your motivation to not be these, because these are inherently selfish. Money for me, status for me. That's what I'm scared of, is I'm scared me will get smaller and everyone will look at me and laugh and go, me is a loser, and you're like, he is. And I'm just scared. I want to be awesome. And he says, that's the wrong motivation. And that'll tyrannize you. I want you to work with your hands. That's what I want you to do. But I want you to do it out of the motivation of love, because that changes everything. Because when you start thinking, how am I going to pick a job? How am I going to pick a major? If you're thinking, what do I do to try to fulfill me and get money? You're just going to stress out. But if you go, wait a minute, how do I pick a job that serves the common good, that helps the brothers flourish? Start thinking that way. You know what's going to happen? You ask a totally different set of questions. Not how much does it pay? How much fun I'll have? You don't ask those questions. You go, what will help the people flourish? What you'll begin to do to answer that is you'll look at two things. Number one, you'll look at how you're built. You'll look at my gifts. What do I do that can help people flourish? What can I be a part of that maximally helps the community? And that's the question you start asking. How do I, if God built me and God built me to love others, what can I do that will maximally help others? And you begin to pursue that and question that. And so it might be a high-paying job, it might not. But I want you to do something that you're gifted to do and passionate about doing. I don't want a doctor who's just treating me because they became a doctor for the money, you know? Because then I'm just a means to the end. They're like, well, I don't really care about you. Patients are just sort of this unfortunate thing I have to do to get to that paycheck, all right? I don't want that doctor. And not only do I not want that doctor, I don't want him to be a doctor. I don't want him to be moving around the medical community and they all know, yeah, he's a doctor, but he really hates it here. But he loves the Lord. That's weird. I want you to do something that you're built to do, you're good at, you flourish. And it may make a lot of money, it may not. That's not even an issue. I do what most benefits the community. And maybe for you it is medicine. Maybe it's being a teacher. Maybe it's doing construction. It's doing something that you go, when I do this, it helps the community flourish. And I've got friends that, I'll be honest with you, and I've said this before, I don't know thing one about money or numbers. Stresses me out. As a youth pastor, I lost on a regular basis a lot of money. Like physically lost thousands of dollars. And I remember going on a mission trip, honestly, and they were like, hey, you're a business major, we'll put you in charge of the finances. And the books were off by thousands of dollars. And they came back and they're like, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. I got scared and I don't know. And I hurt a Christian organization. I hurt an inner city ministry because I was doing something I'm not good at. And so you look and go, what am I good at? What can I do that helps the community flourish? That's the question you start asking. And then you start asking not only what do I do, what's the work of my hands that's productive? But then you start asking, and where are the needs? Where are places where the social fabric's breaking? Where are places where my gifts can meet needs? Because maybe you'll use in this field, maybe that one, maybe in this country, maybe that one. It can be a spectrum you don't know. It's not like there's this one job that's perfect for you. There's probably a spectrum. And you go, where are the needs? What do they need? And how do I apply my gifts to these needs? And when you start asking that question, that's when a search for a job gets fun. That's when it's not scary anymore. That's when it's, God built me to serve people, and I'm going to figure out how, and I'm going to see their needs, and I'm going to meet them, and we're going to win. That makes the search for a job fun. He says, I want you to do that. You find your gifts, you see the world's needs, and you put those together, and everybody wins. And that's what we're called to do. So that's the what. And you go, how do I do it? How do I go about work? So I search for work in a way that makes everybody flourish. Great. Now, how? Notice he says how is that you will win the respect of outsiders. I want you to not just pick a job that you're good at and meets needs. When you enter into the workforce, I want you to work in such a way that wins the respect of outsiders. I want your work ethic to be so that outsiders look and they respect the Christian. Now, what's interesting about that is, he's not necessarily talking about the kind of work you do, because he says work with your hands in order to win the respect for outsiders. The interesting thing is, for the Greek people, to work with your hands, to be an artisan, was seen as lowly and demeaning. It was seen as small. It wasn't seen as sophisticated. The life of the mind was sophisticated. So he's not saying here, Christian, go get the job that everyone goes, wow, and get that job that they go, you're awesome. You made it there. And you're like, I know. It's because I'm awesome and I love Jesus. Hey, all right, like, that's not it. He says you do work, and you do work that they may think is small. But you do that work in a way that they see your pursuit of quality, they see your pursuit of excellence, they see the way you handle the job, that it's not about money, and they look at you and go, that is crazy. Like, what's gotten into you? And they'll respect that. They'll see something, they go, there's something very different about that. I heard a story, I think it was about Michelangelo working on a piece of art, and working on a piece of it back in a corner, a statue or painting, I don't remember where, in a part where human eyes couldn't even see. And they asked him, why are you spending so much time on the particularities and nuances of a piece of art nobody will see? And he says, God sees. God sees. And you see, as he worked at art, he said, I'm going to pursue this with excellence because God values work, I will value work, and as I pursue work that way, people respect that, even if it confuses them. I've talked in here before about when I was at college, waiting tables. Waiting tables was not a job I was passionate about. And sometimes you have to work in a job that isn't just the union of all your passions, and glory and the needs of the world. Sometimes you just got to wait tables, right? But I decided I'm going to wait tables, and I'm going to wait tables for the glory of God. And I'm going to do this in a way that pursues flourishing. And I remember the first time I worked there, it was here in College Station. We showed up, and the company was opening, and they had a big meeting of all of us waiters and all the people who were going to work there. And it was interesting, as the meeting started, the room quickly, you figured out who's waited tables before, who were the veterans, and who's never waited tables before. And it became like this discipleship at the bar, And I remember there was one girl in particular that was telling stories. She's like, yeah, one time I had this six top and it was crazy. And all the young ones are like, teach me, a wise one. And it was like this weird thing happening. And I remember at one point, the most seasoned veteran waiter said to the young ones, she said, I'll tell you the worst day to work. She said, when? She went, Sunday, lunch. She said, all the Christians get out of church, and they're cranky because they're hungry, and they're the worst tippers. And they were all like, yes, okay, never work Sunday lunch, And she said that, and I remember that was really discouraging. And I remember walking out, that was day one at this job, and I walked out and I'm like, man, and I remember walking to the parking lot, and I didn't tell this girl I was a Christian. I didn't say anything or have a big cross on or anything, but I don't know how she could tell. But I was walking out, and this girl, other waiter, walked up next to me, and she was like, that was pretty depressing, wasn't it? I said, yeah, it was real depressing. And then I remember she looked at me and smiled, and she goes, well, let's change their perception. And it was like, you could hear the music start, like 80s montage, like, we will. And it's like, let's do it. And there was a little group of us Christians that decided we're going to work totally different. And I'm going to help you with your tables, even though I won't make money. I'm going to help you bust your tables, even though that won't make me any money. I'm going to come to work early. I'll take your shift. You need it. I'll clean up afterwards. I'll make everything look great. We are going to chase after this thing in a way that's unbelievable. I remember one girl came. She was this wonderful Christian girl. She showed up with a big crate of peaches. And she was like, my family grows peaches. And I was like, great. And she was like, try one. And I said, I don't like peaches. I hate them. And I remember she was this real sweet, real soft-spoken girl. And it was the first time I ever got any like sass from her. I was like, oh, I hate peaches. They're gross. And she was like, oh, you've never tried my family's peaches. And I was like, it's not gonna matter, girl. All right. And she was kind of like, boom, handed me a peach in front of everybody. And I was like, it doesn't even, I bit into it. And I'm like, okay, that was fantastic. And then I kind of had to reorient I was like, okay, apparently I'm now in the peach loving camp with a lot of nuance. All right. I'm not fully in, but wow. And she came and she's bringing stuff for people. I remember for me, I would do odd jobs on the side. There was one time where the cooks had these grates above them, and these grates got covered with grease, from coming up from the grill, and it had turned yellow and then brown and then black. And the boss asked me, will you clean those? And I said, yeah. And I decided I'm gonna make those things glow with Shekinah glory. And we took them out to this car wash where they have degreaser on those big guns, and we spent $10. We just turned up U2 and just spent a couple hours just like, all right, and just began powering these things until they glowed. And I remember when two of those cooks, guys who didn't know the Lord, came back, and I remember they came up to me and they walked up and they were like, hey, dude, thanks for cleaning those grates. I was like, no problem, man. And they were like, no, seriously, thank you. I'm like, okay. I started walking up and they're like, no. And you could tell they didn't know what to say. They don't typically compliment, but they were like, no, really. Like, and it was confusing to them. You could tell it was a moment, and I'm like, it's okay. But they were looking, and they're like, I don't know why you did that. I don't know. I don't understand any of it. But you know what they did? Came to church with us. And they were open to the gospel. And I think you go and you do a job that you're great at, and even if you're doing a job that you're not, whether it's a great job or not, you pursue it with an excellence that outsiders don't understand, but they'll see as beautiful. You live a beautiful life. And the result will be, he says, and you be dependent on nobody. He says, I want you to be a community that's not a drain of resources, but you bring resource to the community. I want the Christian community to be people who don't sap energy from each other or the town. I want you to be people that bring energy to the town, bring flourishing to the town, that you are a source of life. Because when you do that, that's a way to love the brothers. You're kind in that restaurant, you're going to make Christians shine. You're going to make Christians shine. You're going to change their perspective. You shine at your job, you make it easier on all of us. We all win when you shine in your job. And then he says the result is we all flourish. We win. That's what the Christian does. So there was a man I met in college. He wasn't in college. I was. His name was John Perkins. And he grew up in the 40s and 50s as a sharecropper in Mississippi. Black man in a very racist South. And after a couple years of sharecropping, he decided, as soon as I'm old enough, I'm getting out of here. And he moved to California. And he moved to California because there's more opportunities of people of his color in that day. And he got a career, got a job, sending his kid to a daycare, found out his kid was quoting Bible verses. And he wondered what was going on, and so he went and he began to meet Christians. And he always thought Christianity was a joke and something for the weak. But he had never really studied the Bible. And so the more he started to study it with this group, he saw it was beautiful. And he became a Christian. And then God broke his heart for the people of Mississippi. And he moved back. And he moved to this little town, Mendenhall, and it had a railroad track. And you had one side with pretty houses and streets. And you had another side with shacks and no streets. But at the end of each row of shacks were two little honky-tonks, places where you could get drunk. And so he saw over here on the black side of town, he saw education was very low because girls got pregnant early. Because the only place for little kids to hang out were these honky-tonks. Guys would go to get drunk, kids would go to listen to music, girls got pregnant very young, and so kids were raising kids. And those kids had nowhere else to play but in the dirt, in the honky-tonk, and it was this vicious cycle. And he showed up in this poor, uneducated, malnourished, broken place. And he didn't start a coup, didn't start lighting houses on fire across the tracks. Didn't start to try to break them down or destroy them or get angry at them. You know what he did? He began to teach a Bible study and began to meet and teach people about the glories of God. And then he looked around and he said, you know what? We need a daycare. And so they had his wife and a couple other ladies start taking care of other kids so these young teen moms could keep learning and get an education. And as they began to learn and grow, he built a playground so kids didn't have to play in the bar anymore, but they could play somewhere healthy and be taught the Word of God and basic skills. Then they opened a thrift store so they could all change goods together. Didn't have any money, but they would all share their goods. You need a shirt? You got it. You need some crops? You got it. And they began to share with each other. And they built a daycare. They built a school. They built a thrift store. They built a general store. They built roads, I think. But I'll tell you what they did over the course of 20 years. They built a community. And they built a massive ministry that got noticed by the other side of town. And people began to come. And people began to come to Christ. And he changed a community with the gospel. Changed a town with the gospel. And then began to reproduce that in other towns. And I met him in Colorado at a church that was following his model and totally changing the city because they stepped into a Safeway that had closed because of crime. And they bought it, made it a church, and they were converting people. They were baptizing people who used to rob that store. And they came in and they said, we're going to go to places where the fabric is breaking. And we're going to be people who take our gifts and use them to make the community flourish. And so the outside world respects that. They're going to see it and marvel at that. And then we begin to flourish. We give to each other and don't take. And it's a way to love each other and to love the world. And when you work hard and you work with your gifts, the gospel goes out. Because at the end of the day, you know who you look like? You look like Jesus. Because Jesus saw a hurt and dying world, and he stepped into it. And he didn't step into it to overthrow Caesar. He didn't step in it to destroy the Romans. He took on our weakness. He took on our infirmities. He took on our hurts. He stepped into our physical body. And he lived a perfect life. And he brought a community that when trusting him could find life in themselves. He lived the perfect life we could not. He died, sacrificed himself for us. He beat death and rose. How? By the triumph of God so he could produce a little community of us. And now we walk into a hurting world and we say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to look like him. I'm going to come where the world is breaking. I'm going to give my life and I'm going to see them grow. By the grace of God, for the glory of God, and for the good of my community, I will be a source of life. And that's my hope for us.